And everybody, even if you haven't pushed record. Now I'm going to welcome everybody online as well. Thanks everyone for being here. It's we're running about 5 minutes late, but we do have a quorum, so we want to go ahead and get started. Appreciate everyone being here. We've got some new members of the committee with us as well. So let's we'll go around the room and just everybody introduce themselves so you know who's here, and then we'll hit the newbies online. Down at the end.
Rosie Hernandez with the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Jordan Chandler with WFRC.
Nate Curry, WFRC. Dan Dugan, Salt Lake City Council.
Joe Smoka, Immigration Canyon.
Beth Holbrook, Utah Transit Authority.
Andrea Pearson, WFRC.
I'm Andrew Gruber. I'm Executive Director here at Wasatch Front Regional Council. Good to see returning members, and those of you that are new, either in the room or online, welcome. We're very happy to be working with you.
I'm Mark Shepard, Mayor of Clearfield City.
Wayne Benyon, WFRC staff.
Jeff Silvestrini, Air Quality Board. So I guess I'm a new member in a way, but I have a new hat to wear, which I like hats. So anyway, great to be here. Mayor of Mill Creek too.
Ted Knowlton, WFRC staff. Sorry, Russ.
Russ Fox with UTA. Ben Hewitt with UDOT.
Craig Smith, Florida City.
Steve Gale, Morgan City.
Miranda Jones-Cox, WFRC.
Tim Watkins, WFRC.
Kip Billings, Wasatch Front Regional Council staff.
Ben Withrich, Wasatch Front Regional Council staff.
Rex Harris, FHWA.
I guess that was everybody back there. And then if we want to have those online introduce themselves.
Blaine Fackrell, Morgan County Commissioner.
Kevin Jepson, Perry City Mayor.
Natalie Hall, Bluffdale City Mayor.
Ken Ritchie, Ogden City Council.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Go ahead.
No, you're good.
Lauren Palmer, Mayor in Harriman.
Okay, and then we just had one walk into the room.
I'm Sherry Bingham, Mayor of Hooper, and sorry I'm late.
You're good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's nice to have new members here as well, and we hope you'll be active and help us out. Our first item on the agenda is the minutes from our November 9th meeting. They were sent out. Has everyone had a chance to review them? And so are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Mayor Hall, I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That'll take us to item number 2, which is our chair's report. And I'm going to turn some time over to Miranda. Give us a legislative update.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So as you all are aware, we are in the thick of the 2024 legislative session. And I am just going to give a brief overview of a few things that we're watching right now and working on, things relevant to the Transcom Committee. But just to kind of orient where we're at in the session right now, the legislature has about 2 weeks left of the session to continue to pass I'm not actually sure how many bills have been released now. I think probably over 800 bills at this point are out there. And those next few weeks is the time where the legislature will appropriate the state budget and finish passing the bills that they can. As far as the appropriations process go, and I'll kind of hit that first, this week the legislature, the Executive Appropriations Committee is planning to finalize the consensus revenue estimates. So they'll finalize ultimately how much funding the state has to work with when they finish their appropriations process. So over the next few weeks, EAC will finalize what will be funded out of what was proposed from the appropriations subcommittees. And so we'll start seeing perhaps next week some of those initial funding lists from the EAC and what might be included, and those revenue estimates likely later this week. I will note two relevant appropriations for this group that I think are worth noting. There's a number out there as well, right? And we do have our appropriations tracker, which you all can dig into if you'd like to know a little bit more or see what other appropriations we're watching. But the most notable one, which directly impacts the work of this group and for our partners, is this funding that was appropriated of over roughly $1.1 billion to go into the Transportation Investment Fund, or the TIF. This funding was appropriated in the Infrastructure and General Government base budget. So this funding, it was kind of unprecedented in that it kind of appropriated this funding kind of ahead of time before the legislature continues to do their appropriating work over these next few weeks. They set this 1.1 billion aside and said, we want this funding to go to transportation. They had specifically put some language aside last year saying that that funding could be used for debt service repayment. But as that funding goes into the TIF, into the TIF, as it goes into the TIF, it would free up existing TIF dollars, which could then be used for other capacity projects. And so really it's, the last 3 years or so, we've seen the legislature put, billions of dollars each year into transportation funding. We've seen that, multimodally, some of that to transit, some of that to the TIF, and sometimes to specific projects. But what I think is notable here is that the legislature isn't saying, we want you to spend this, this funding on this project or that project, but it'll go into the TIF and then can be used for that debt service or to for additional prioritization of projects. So it's a really notable appropriation this session. And then second, I want
Miranda.
to, oh yeah.
Excuse me,
Please.
before you move off of the Transportation Investment Fund appropriation, which is, I want to highlight, of course, that's notable, generally speaking, because it's a significant amount of money being appropriated to transportation. For this committee, particularly for Transcom, there is a role with regard to those funds in that the monies that are programmed, that's the terminology for the allocating of actual dollars to specific projects, the monies that are programmed by the State Transportation Commission for projects that are in this area, in the Wasatch Front, have to come through this committee also. So this is the balanced structure that exists, but with a metropolitan planning organization like WFRC, made up of principally of local elected officials who have the ability through the MPO to have a say in what projects are done in our area. So the Transportation Commission has to program those funds to projects because it's state dollars, but you as a committee and the Wasatch Front Regional Council also have to approve the selection of those projects. So it's a shared responsibility that exists in our area on the Wasatch Front. And for our friends that are here and colleagues from Morgan and Tooele counties, I just want to note, Mayor Gale's nodding because we've talked about this before, that this committee does not have the official responsibility for programming of transportation projects in Morgan and Tooele counties. That responsibility lies with UDOT because Morgan and Tooele are officially, technically, rural as opposed to urban counties. However, we have dialogue here about the entirety of the region. So Miranda, I thank you for letting me interject just the particular relevance of this to this committee.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. And I'll note with the second item, so the first item, Transportation Investment Fund, this is maybe done in so many ways. It's already been appropriated. Things can always still change at the end of session, right, as they tend to. But in so many ways, that funding has been secured. Of course, the revenue estimates could further impact that this week, but we'll keep an eye on that. Now, what hasn't been done quite yet and is still, as we understand, being negotiated and discussed is this recommendation that came from the governor's budget and from UDOT is the Transit Transportation Investment Fund appropriation. In the governor's budget, and I think we may have talked about this before, it was a recommendation of a 1% transfer from the TIF into the TTIF. That would be approximately $45 million ongoing. And again, the relevance here is $45 million in additional, transit dollars of stable, ongoing funding for transit each year to be programmed, again, by the Transportation Commission with the TTIF. Again, this one is still being negotiated. Will it look exactly like a 1% transfer from the TIF to the TTIF? We're not quite sure at this time, but this has been one of WFRC's key priorities going into the legislative session, will continue to be, and we're hoping for a positive outcome on this one. So again, there's a somewhat balanced approach in multimodal funding for this legislative session to both roads, to transit, and as we saw last year with a significant amount of funding going into the active transportation investment fund with that $45 million. Andrew, did you have something else to add?
Only I want to respond to a question that was put into the chat by Commissioner Fackrell from Morgan County. He's asking about whether the Wasatch Front Regional Council has the responsibility to recommend projects for the state. And the answer to that is, in essence, not officially, but we WFRC works with Morgan County and the Morgan RPO, the Rural Planning Organization, and the same thing for Tooele County with the Tooele County RPO. Wayne coordinates our work with the Tooele County RPO and Julie Bjornstad with the Morgan County RPO. And so we support Morgan and Tooele cities and counties as they develop their priorities in conjunction with UDOT. And then those funds or those priorities can be, as they go through the process, eligible for funding with state funds.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Fackrell.
So I do want to touch on just like a few pieces of legislation. I'll note there's a lot out there. I think on our bill tracker right now, we have almost 50 bills that are currently being tracked. And as a caveat, like the bill tracker does need a little bit of updating, which will be done this week. But things are moving quickly, right? Bills are passing out and moving throughout the process quickly. So keep an eye on that, but we'll make sure that it's up to date. So real quick, again, some relevant pieces of legislation. HB 367, this is a bill from Representative Karen Peterson. It's called Local Government Fees Amendments. And the purpose of this bill is to set guardrails and parameters around a transportation utility fee, which can currently be imposed by municipalities. The idea of putting guardrails around this is to put a process in place for cities to have a uniform way of imposing a transportation utility fee in their cities, so that the process is reasonable and also that the fee itself is reasonable for imposition on cities and on your residents. And so really this ability to impose this fee is already available to cities. This would just kind of help put those parameters around the process. Second is housing and transit reinvestment zone amendments. You all are likely aware and familiar of the HTRZ tool that was put in place several years ago and has now is being put into place with several proposals for HTRZs throughout the region. This specific bill, while making minor changes to the code and clarifications, I think notably one of the things that it does is it ensures that the affordability requirements are maintained throughout the life of an HTRZ. If you'll recall, an HTRZ requires a certain percentage of the housing within an HTRZ to be affordable. And that's kind of the purpose of the HTRZ is to further affordable housing around transit-oriented development. And so WFRC has a pretty comprehensive bill summary on SB 208. And so feel free to take a look at that. We'll get that up on our website here soon. And then lastly, SB 155, road usage charge amendments. You might be aware of the state program that has been run by the Utah Department of Transportation for the past several years. A road usage charge program is a mileage-based fee. It's been a pilot program kind of up till this point that would allow drivers to be charged a small fee per each mile driven as opposed to paying the gas tax from the pump. And what this bill does is it further implements the road usage charge program, largely by removing the cap on the road usage charge program. So it was capped at a certain amount so that those in the program would not have to pay above a certain amount. But by removing the cap, it further allows folks in the program to implement the program so that moving forward, those with electric vehicles could potentially use this tool to basically pay for those costs for roads. And so anyways, just makes further progress moving forward on that tool. And, interestingly, we were at a National Association of Regional Councils conference earlier this week in Washington, D.C., and these programs, a mileage-based user fee, is something that's on the minds of a lot of those at the U.S. Department of Transportation, at other states, and many folks are looking at how can we implement these types of programs and see how feasible it is moving forward. And Utah has definitely led the charge in that quite a bit. So those are a few notable bills, but like I said, there are quite a few on the tracker that you may also want to peruse and check out. I'll just finish up here by, again, sharing those resources, the bill tracker, the appropriations tracker that are available on our website under our public involvement page, and say that I also send out a government affairs email at the end of each week that is comprehensive and sharing some of the things that have happened through the week, the bills that we're watching, sometimes a little more in depth than maybe we can get here in the meeting. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or just call it good there, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. Appreciate all the work you're doing up there. It's a lengthy, exhausting process, but there's only 2 weeks left.
All right.
The next item is our opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone here from the public to speak? Need to welcome a few others that have joined us. Got Commissioner Harvey has graced us with his presence today. This is two times in 2 days, and I've got to hang out with Commissioner Harvey. So
Sorry. Good for both of you.
yeah, that's right. It's good for him. Commissioner Van Tassel, the State Transportation Commission, Mayor Harris from Bountiful, and Mayor Vincent from West Point. We appreciate you joining us.
And also Bryce.
Oh, and then Bryce Bird from DAQ. Welcome. Well, we will, I'm going to turn the time over to Wayne to talk about Transcom's roles and responsibilities and our schedule for 2024.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate everybody's participation and interest today. Thought I'd start off with a bit of background, especially for new members and alternates. WFRC, as you've probably got some awareness of. Maybe I'll, thank you. Is not only a metropolitan planning organization with responsibilities for long-range and short-range transportation planning, but also an association of governments. And in both of those roles, as an MPO and an AOG, WFRC provides resources of various types. You can see up on the wall some of the types of resources or some of the purposes for the resources identified in the roles underneath the mission statement, and that same information is on the website under the About tab. And thank you. And as one of two primary policy advisory committees for or to the regional council, the WFRC Regional Council, Transcom deals mostly with short-range planning issues, whereas the Regional Growth Committee deals primarily with long-range planning issues. And I'll just defer to you, Jordan. Thank you. In your meeting materials is the memorandum of agreement that was most recently updated in 2014 that outlines the roles of both Transcom and the Regional Growth Committee. And as you can see by today's attendance, not only have we got numerous or many local elected officials, we've got members of the State Transportation Commission and members of the UTA Board of Trustees, and also of the Utah Air Quality Board that are able to participate, so that we've really got a collaborative process or opportunity for a collaborative process through Transcom with this great participation. So let's see. So the primary role of Transcom is taking action on both transportation programs as well as projects, and being a forum for discussing near-term transportation issues. And next. It's hard to talk much about the responsibilities of Transcom without first giving you a bit of background on what's called the Transportation Improvement Program, a 6-year cataloging or compiling of projects and programs where funding has been committed. And it's done in, as Andrew mentioned earlier, in close collaboration with the state, and there's a statewide transportation improvement program that UDOT is responsible, and both UDOT and WFRC or Transcom or both take action on the TIP. And the TIP cuts across all modes as well as including all funding sources. Thank you. So a few of the responsibilities of Transcom are approving a draft TIP or releasing it for public comment, and then recommending to the council approval of the Transportation Improvement Program. Transcom has the responsibility for approving or recommending amendments to the TIP. And then many of you are aware that there are 4 primary transportation capital improvement programs, funding programs, federal funding programs that are administered through WFRC for implementation of projects. And so there's responsibility in recommending new projects each year for these 4 funding programs. Thanks. And a bit about the timing of all of this, you can see on this slide. And so just to clarify, in months when the council, the regional council does not meet, they have delegated to Transcom the authority to approve amendments to the TIP. And you can see a bit about the timing of the responsibilities with those funding programs that WFRC, administers. And finally, also in your meeting materials is an outline of topics for each of our 5 meetings for the year. And then at the bottom of that sheet is a list of potential additional discussion items. And I would welcome any feedback on that.
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, if there are topics in there that you, as a committee, want to discuss, please let us know so we can put those on the agenda and properly cover them here. Wayne, thank you. Thank you for all you do. Hopefully that gives those who are new to the committee a little bit more of an idea as to what we do here and our role with WFRC. And as Wayne mentioned, one of the biggest is the amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program. And we have some that we need to discuss, some that we took care of as a council. I'll turn the time over to Ben Withrich to cover those and some additional new amendments to the TIP.
There, now we're ready to roll. Thank you, Chair. So, as mentioned before, there is something that I'd like to, as we have opportunity. Clicker isn't working. So we'll talk about the TIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Program. Can you hit it again? There we go. Thank you. So the Transportation Improvement Program, as Wayne kind of reviewed there with us, they implement the projects for the long-range plan. Now, I like the word Wayne used. So the Transportation Improvement Program is a catalog. It's a catalog of projects. It's a giant list of projects that have funds allocated to that particular project. And in that list of projects, it implements the long-range plans on the highway, the transit, the active transportation projects. It helps us meet the short-range needs along the Wasatch Front, and it also has the programs and the projects that'll provide the maintenance for our existing transportation system. So today, the Transportation Improvement Program has 3 agenda items specific to the TIP. First one, as noted by the chair, is a report on the approved board modification that was taken by or made by the Regional Council in their 25th meeting. The second is to present to you a new board modification for your review and approval, and then a review of the federal funds that were obligated during the fiscal year 2023. So in your meeting materials is a list of tables. There's actually 4 tables, and those tables have identified the 14 projects that the Regional Council had opportunity to review and approve. And this is in there for your information. And if there's any questions on any of these, we can cover it. Otherwise, is it all right to move forward, Mr. Chair? Thank you. This is real delayed. So that was the last 2. All right. So here, agenda item 5B then will give us an opportunity to present or to review with you the board modification before you today. There are actually 2 projects that are identified. This list is included in your meeting materials along with the resolution. And we'll go through each of these projects. The first project here is in Davis County. It's a project that's submitted by Layton City. It's on Gentile Street near the intersection of 3200 West. It's actually a safe routes to school that goes from 3475 West up to 3200 West. Now, this project was reviewed and recommended by Transcom to the Regional Council for approval. The initial project cost $174,000 plus. That was the estimated project amount. Oh, we're going too fast. Now, The requested amount was 162,000 plus, and this body recommended that amount, and that amount was approved for this project. Now, since the project's been under design, now we can click it. And we can click it once more. As this project was under design and study, it was identified that because of the increase in project cost, as well as the labor, as well as the need for temporary construction easements, this particular project was estimated now to cost 450,000 plus. Now, when the city come back to the staff and says, we've got an issue, we got a concern here, what do we do? Well, we helped them in the preparation. There were a couple of options that we could do. One, we first encouraged them to go back and look for whatever additional funds they could bring to the table. They could come to the regional council and request the shortfall of funds. And then we also asked them, because it was at the time, that they prepare and submit a letter of intent in the case that this project would have to go through the whole process again to identify the additional funds. They did all of that. We then took this information to the Technical Advisory Committee, and we said, here's the situation, just like we presented to you. The project has escalated in cost more than twice. And the city has been prepared. They've done everything that we've asked them to do. They've come to the table with additional funds. They're making a request for funds. Do we approve the board modification, or do we have the project go through the whole process to where it would enter into the draft programs, potentially be recommended by this committee to receive those funds, then go through the public review and comment, and then be approved by the council in August, and then be approved by Federal Highways and Federal Transit Agency or administration, and that would be effective October 1. Well, putting that many more months and in the years yet for those funds to come forward, this project could potentially go even higher. Now, there was an issue for this project. During the early course of, there was some school boundary changes which eliminated the crossing guard, the mid-block crossing for everyone that walked along that shoulder of the road that had no sidewalk. But there were still students that were using that particular area, hence the request for the funds to make a uniform cross-section on this road and construct, as you can see along the field there, construct a shoulder with a sidewalk that would take them to the east to that intersection. Well, the technical advisory recommended that we recommend the requested amount of $245,000, and we bring that to you today, that the request is for $245,000. The city's bringing an additional $31,000 to the project, and that would give us a total estimated project fund of $450,800. The next project that we have before us is in Salt Lake City. This is a request for UDOT. This is for a track station down in the Daybreak area. First of all, if we look at or review our transit system, we've got an amazing transit system across the valley. And it is continually growing. You can see on here the bus routes. You can see on here the green line, the blue line, the red line. You can see the commuter rail. But this system is continually growing just like our road network. And with this board modification, we're particularly focusing right now down in the Daybreak area. So in the Daybreak area, if we focus in on this area, this particular line is the Lake Avenue. That's the Lake Avenue right there. And then the red line comes in the Daybreak on this location right here. So the request for this board modification is to construct a new station, a track station there in Daybreak. And so it would more than likely happen within that blue shaded area right there, somewhere along the red line, close to the Lake Avenue. This particular project is estimated to cost $6 million. The TTIF funds are providing $4.2 million at a request in an application for prioritization, and then the locals are bringing $1.8 million for this project, for that total project cost. That would be all of the board modifications we have for this time.
Okay, well, thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben on either of these two projects? Well, okay, then we need a motion to approve these two projects. We have a motion from Commissioner Harvey.
I'll second.
Second.
And a whole bunch of seconds. Andrea, you can choose whichever one of those you want. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is unanimous. Ben, I believe we're back to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So this brings us into the obligation of the federal funds in 2023. What does that matter to me, you might ask? Well, so by federal law, Wasatch Front Regional Council, in conjunction with UDOT and UTA, have to develop an obligation report of the federal funds that were obligated in the previous year. But before I start, Wayne, is there any preference you would like to make?
Thanks, Ben. Just by way of context, so the focus of Ben's report is on federal dollars along with the local matching funds. This is perhaps a bit less than half of the transportation investment that happens pretty much annually. So unlike many other states, the state of Utah commits a lot of state dollars to transportation investments. And so today's report gives you a feeling for the impact of the federal dollars, but just by way of context, there's even more state funding that's not included in this report that even exceeds the amount of federal dollars here. Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. So this kind of comes back to even some of the very early roots of what an MPO is, so why we're around. So clear back in the late 60s is when Congress established MPO areas to enable local governments to have a say on where those federal funds are being spent within the state. And that was where that was one of the main reasons for the formation of the MPO. So we're coming back reporting where these funds have, as was mentioned earlier, when this body has an opportunity to make those recommendations on where funds go and on what projects happen. So what is obligation? Well, obligation is the federal government's legal commitment. This is their commitment that they're going to reimburse the state or the other entities for the federal share of a project's cost. So it's not the amount spent, but it's the amount of money that Federal Highways has actually set aside and says, we commit these dollars for this project to reimburse when this project happens. Partly that we need to understand is the obligation report, all of these, the project wasn't necessarily initiated during this year. It could have started 2 or 3 years ago. And then we also need to know that the amounts reflected in this report may or may not equal the final cost of a project. And so in your meeting materials, you got several cool looking graphs. You got these graphs and you look at them and go, wow, they're really cool, but big deal. Well, here's what we want to be able to pull from them as you're looking at this. So this is a graph of the statewide, all the federal funds that were spent in the state of Utah. We had over 569 million. Now that's with the match. So the federal portion of that was 536 plus million, with the matching dollars of 32 plus million, giving us a total of $569 million. That's a lot of money. There's a lot of work going on. Well, what does that mean project-wise? Well, there's about 609 projects, 604 projects that had some action that obligated or deobligated funds. So we're going to use just one example of the silos. Now, we siloed these into just these few 9 silos, but there's probably, I don't know, Ben, 50, 60 different silos of projects. There's the safety, there's the active transportation, there's the bike ped, there's all these different things that those funds can go down to, but we're gonna bring them all into these silos here. So let's look at this very first silo, is surfacing and resurfacing. So that could be a surface treatment, preventative maintenance, anything that will fall in those lines. That's where these funds were spent. So it says that there were $242 million plus obligated on this project. Well, there was 155 projects that had some action in that surfacing and resurfacing. What does that mean per project? There were 227 obligations on them 155 projects. Those 227 obligations total more than 267 million. Well, that doesn't match the 242. Well, that's because there were also 93 de-obligations. So of those 155 projects, they had some de-obligations in there. So there was 25 plus million that was de-obligated, meaning it come back to the pot of money. So what did that mean? We had over 320 actions in the surfacing and resurfacing there that give us an obligation total of 242 million plus. So now you can see how these numbers actually relate to the projects. Well, so here we are statewide. Let's look at what we are in the Wasatch Front region area. We had, on this particular time, we had more than 300 plus projects, 346, I'm getting closer. So out of that, not yet, we have a total of $339 million that were obligated in the Wasatch Front area. So that's about 59% of the total funds that were spent statewide. Well, 346 is what, about 57% of the total projects. So taking what Wayne told us that the federal funds, this is just one window we're looking out of the federal funds, not including all the local funds, not including all the state funds. These are just the federal funds that we're looking at. So look how busy our state's been, how blessed we've been with all these different improvements that are taking place. And 346 of them are taking place along the Wasatch Front. Well, let's look at how it affects. Oh, in your meeting materials, so there is a table of those 346 actions that you can go in and see on our projects. There's more actions, but you can see what those were. You can see if they were an obligation or de-obligation and when and where. So that table's included in your meeting materials. Well, then the next map or graph that you see is a red graph. And that one here is just the programs that Wasatch Front has the responsibility to program. Those 4 capital programs that Wayne referenced, the STP or Surface Transportation Program, the CMAC or Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, the TAP, which is the Transportation Alternative Program, and the CRP, which is the Carbon Reduction Program. You can see on those that there's 97 projects, and that was the amount of funds that were obligated in each of those funds. Then you can look at those charts and you can say, wow, okay, well, we did pretty good. Well, if you were watching in the chart, it shows that WFRC has a lot more bike ped projects than the whole state does. How does that work? Well, it's actually because within the Wasatch Front area, we had a lot of obligations and not a lot of de-obligations, whereas if you look statewide, there could have been a significant amount of de-obligations that come back. So that state brings the whole number down. But I didn't want you to think my numbers were messed up. Then there's also the tables that have each of the programs, the STP for Salt Lake, STP for the Ogden-Layton, the CMAC for both areas, the TAP for both areas, and the CRP for both areas. Those tables are also included in the meeting materials. Well, in addition to the highways, we've also got the transit. And in the transit this year is a little unique. We have a significant amount that's gone into the capital improvement, 72% of the amount of funds there, 28% into the operation planning and maintenance. Now, on the next table, so, whoops, sorry, I meant to tell you the total there. Isn't it cool to turn the page back and forth? But we got 339 million plus of federal funds that were spent in our transit or on our transit projects. So now if you turn the page, you can see that as you go through, there's 3 pages of tables. The dark blue tables have a significant amount of capital improvements, but they have some of the other, but that's the silo we put those in. And then you can see the cream color are actually just operation planning and maintenance. So that would include all of the projects that had federal obligations for the year 2023.
Thanks, Ben. Any questions for Ben before we let him sit down and rest? You're done, right?
I'm done.
Okay. You look like you wanted to say something else.
Just
Andrew?
thank you.
I just want to offer a brief comment, which is, as you can tell, there's a significant amount of complexity involved in navigating all of these funding sources. Ben was going over the federal funding sources, and it won't come as a surprise to you that the federal funding sources come with a lot of requirements, eligibility requirements and use requirements. And what we do, when I say we, I mean Ben, WFRC as an organization, working with UDOT, working with UTA, working with the cities and the counties, is we work together to navigate the funding sources from federal funds, state funds, regional and local funds, and try to fit them all together in this intricate puzzle that allows projects to move as effectively and efficiently as possible. Because we don't want the sort of bureaucratic requirements to get in the way of projects being funded and moving forward as fast as they can. We have to comply with all the rules, which we do, but our teams collectively, I think, do a really nice job of navigating through all of those requirements to move things along. I'm sure that some of you feel still like it takes too long for things to get done, and we appreciate that and understand that, but our folks are doing everything they can to make sure they're adhering to the rules and moving projects along as effectively as they can. So thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Ben. Appreciate all the work you're doing, and Wayne, thank you as well. We'll go on to item number 6. We've got a roadway safety resolution we need to discuss, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Kip Billings to cover this one for us.
In previous Transcom meetings, we've told you about our comprehensive safety action plan, which is a plan so local governments will have the means and the direction for making roadway safety improvements in your communities. And at the end of this presentation, we'll be asking for a motion for you to recommend to the council to adopt this safety resolution at the meeting next March. So back in July, we contracted with Kimley Horn Associates to complete this safety study. They have Fair and Piers and Penna Powers on their team. I'm going to go to the next slide. To repeat a little bit, the Safety Action Plan is a plan to provide local governments the means to make strategic roadway safety improvements. Next slide. So we set out about a 12-month schedule. We're about 2/3 of the way through that process. Back in October, the consulting team completed an analysis of the crash history for the last 4 years and presented those results in a series of what we call geographic focus area meetings. So we went out to each jurisdiction and shared what was happening in terms of roadway safety within their specific areas. There are some differences in what we see in downtown Salt Lake and what we see out in Morgan. So we had those series of meetings. We're now starting our second round of geographic focus area meetings, where we are bringing back to those jurisdictions specific strategies and roadway safety improvement projects for them to consider. We are anticipating an announcement from Federal Highways before the end of this month. The notice of funding opportunity for the next round of grants under the Safe Streets for All program. And the communities will have the opportunity to apply for those grants. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes for a personal note, what we're talking about here is more than just dates and data and deadlines, the decisions we're making here are very personal and affect people's lives. This is a picture of my uncle Ernest. I never got to meet my uncle Ernest. He was known by his shipmates as Curly. Let me go to the next slide. And this is a 1952 Studebaker Champion. It featured a 3-speed manual transmission. Some of you may be familiar with the 3 on the tree, they would call it. It would have a top speed of about 93 miles per hour. It goes 0 to 60 in a yawn-inducing 17 seconds. Next slide.
Dang, that
please.
was quick.
Here's the interior of a 52 Studebaker. You'll notice the door-to-door bench seat, unencumbered with any seatbelt hardware, so you can motor down the road with your favorite gal right by your side, snuggled up close and all. On the driver's side, you see it's equipped with a 3-inch Javelin, which conveniently doubles as a steering wheel. And you'll notice the windshield mounted flush with the solid steel dashboard, and no concern with driver airbags that could possibly deploy and cause head or neck injuries. So that's a 52 Studebaker. This is the Route 460 near Wilsons, Virginia, on the way to Lynchburg, Virginia. You'll notice the narrow 2-lane highway, little if any improved shoulder, the side slopes about 1-to-1. The cut section on the right comes down nearly flush to the edge of the pavement. And where that car is parked in the distance, right next to it, you see a substantial spruce tree within 15 feet or less of the roadway. Next slide, please. What I find most amazing about this picture is 2 of the sailors survived, but not without serious injury. Next slide, please. This is near that, a current photo near that same section of roadway, and you see a lot of changes. We now have a 4-lane divided highway, wider pavements. The side slopes are much more gradual, and specifically you'll note that the 30-foot clear zone on either side of the pavement. Next slide, please. No, go back to the last one. So my point in sharing that is to make it personal, because I think most everyone has had a personal experience with family or friends involved in a roadway crash. And we've made a lot of improvements since 1953 in our roads and our vehicles. But there's so much more to be done, and particularly in the urban environment. The urban environment is the focus of our comprehensive safety action plan. Okay, now you go. So here's the schedule again for putting our plan together, and some of the different components of that study. Highlighted there in the red, the safety commitment resolution. That's what we wanted to bring forward to you today. Go to the. So we're talking about a paradigm shift. That was an attempt at a play on words. You have the old pair of dimes and the new pair of dimes. Okay. But it's a paradigm shift in.
Thanks
two
for walking
respects.
us through that, Kip.
It's a paradigm shift in two respects. The old paradigm was you use the roadway and you're responsible as a user to be constantly vigilant that you avoid mistakes, and because those mistakes could result in severe injury, even death. The new paradigm is recognizing that humans are fallible, mistakes will be made, and the responsibility is shared between the planner of the roadways, the designer of the roadways, the design of the vehicles, law enforcement, as well as the user all share in this responsibility. The second way it's a paradigm shift is that rather than reacting to crashes after they've occurred, is to be proactive, to identify deficiencies in the roadway system, make those improvements, and do it systematically, not reacting to tragedies after they occur. So the safety resolution includes 5 elements to proactively utilize the safe system approach to improve safety for all roadway users, declaring that any roadway fatality or serious injury is unacceptable, establishes a goal of reducing deaths and serious injuries by 50% by the year 2040. And in annual terms, that goal is reducing roadway fatalities and serious injuries by about 2.5% each year. And lastly, a commitment to measure the progress and report to this body or others our progress towards achieving those goals. Next slide. So yeah, as a reminder, we are expecting that information from Federal Highways, the notice of funding opportunity, when that'll be available for the next round. And when we get that NOFO info, we will pass that along to you. Past experiences, there's about 90 days from when we get the notification to when the applications will be due. So any questions about the safety commitment resolution or the process?
Mr. Chair, may I just add briefly to what Kip said, and then welcome any questions or comments? Thank you, Kip. Let me just also note for everybody, the full text of the resolution that Kip summarized was in your packets and it was sent out to you. And just to be sort of totally clear about this, the program, the federal program that Kip is describing, Safe Streets for All, will have significant resources available for local communities to apply for these projects to be done in your communities for safety. And there are certain requirements that we have to take in order to increase our region and your chances of and your competitiveness for those grants. One of those things is, in fact, adopting a resolution along this line. So that's part of the motivation for our doing this resolution. In addition, of course, to the substance of the resolution itself, emphasizing how important roadway safety is for all users. So whether it's you're driving, you're walking, you're biking, it's essential that we make our roads as safe as they possibly can be. Thanks, Kip.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions for Kip? Kip, I want to thank you for the presentation and for making it personal. That's never easy, and any of us that have experienced that as well understand the difficulty of that and how important this program is. So thank you for doing that. If there are no questions, then I would entertain a motion to recommend the resolution to the council for approval.
Motion to recommend, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion from Commissioner Harvey and a second from Mayor Smolka. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. We'll pass that on to the council. Yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify also that these second round of geographic focus area workshops are going on currently. We had 2 yesterday. We've got another 10 coming up. You should have received an email notifying you about that, and your staff, at least planning, engineering, and law enforcement, should have received a calendar invite. And so just to make sure you're aware of that, and maybe check in with your staff, make sure that they're also ready to participate in those workshops. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. Well, now we're privileged to have Bryce Bird with us, the Executive Director of the State Division of Air Quality. And he's going to talk to us about a less happy subject, you know, but no.
Another one.
Yeah. Bryce, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you. You can take it here. You can stand up front.
Quick introduction first, right?
Sure, I'd be happy to just say a quick intro, and then Bryce, do you want to just stay there? You can do whatever you want.
I think so.
Okay, sounds good. This is our last substantive topic for this meeting. And we're shifting gears here a little bit to an issue related to air quality, and it's a regulatory issue about ozone. And why are we talking about this here with you? The reason is because this issue has implications for transportation and transportation projects. Basically, there are, and Bryce is going to go over this in detail, but there are federal standards for the amount of ozone that can be in the atmosphere. And the challenge that we face in Utah is that the overwhelming majority, 86% of the ozone in our atmosphere in this area is not caused by human-caused sources here in Utah. It actually is so-called background ozone. It's blowing in from California or even international sources like from China. It's actually even produced by pine trees that have emissions that result in ozone formation in the atmosphere. So the overwhelming majority is not caused by things that we have control over. Yeah, having said that, our air has gotten so much cleaner, and we've reduced our emissions dramatically over the past decades, largely from our cars getting cleaner and providing transportation choices, transit, biking, and walking. But nonetheless, we find the standard having come down to a point that we are likely to not be able to conform to it. And the risk of that is that we could have imposed upon us significant restrictions on our ability to modify our transportation plans, and then also significant restrictions on how we can use our transportation dollars. Not just federal dollars, these are federal standards, but federal, state, and even local dollars for any regionally significant project. Ironically, not just roadway projects, but even transit projects that help to reduce driving and result in cleaner, less emissions, cleaner air also could be impacted by this. So we wanted to highlight this to you as a group. It's a somewhat complex scientific and regulatory issue, but it's a potentially serious one, and we feel like it's important for you to be aware of this issue and the work that you do. So, Bryce, I probably said too much and stole a little too much of your thunder, your ozone, or whatever. But take it away. And last thing I'll say also, I want to recognize Mayor Silvestrini is a member of the State Air Quality Board and also works to help us navigate these issues. So Bryce and Mayor Silvestrini, take it away.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to some more elected officials about this issue. The slides I have are ones that we prepared for briefings with state elected officials. And I will probably provide some additional commentary about how that worked through that process and some of the challenges we have now. So go ahead, next slide. Actually, don't go back to the first slide, but mentioned that UDOT was involved as well as we looked at this strategy and briefing on these topics to help move this forward. And the issue is, as Andrew mentioned, we've had a lot of history with the Clean Air Act. It is a fantastic federal law that has resulted in reductions nationwide of emissions of over 70%. And at the same time, of course, economic growth in the country as well. That we can have both, but it is a process that sometimes is cumbersome. So the original Clean Air Act was put in place in 1970. In 1990, there were major changes to the Clean Air Act because Congress found that regions with air quality challenges weren't making enough efforts on their own to bring themselves back into compliance with the standards. And so they put more prescriptive requirements in the Clean Air Act. And one of those is the one that we're going to highlight today. And that is if you're not making progress, there's a hammer that EPA has, and that is the ability to first put sanctions on industrial sources, require them to have 2-to-1 offsets. So anytime they increase their emissions or a new industrial source comes in, they have to identify reductions of double what they're bringing into the airshed. And then shortly after that, these transportation sanctions as well. The graphic there, I think, is important to help us understand the issue. Is we were meeting the standard and had always been meeting the standard for ozone here in the valley. But over the past several years, the EPA has lowered the standard twice. Congress, when they implemented the Clean Air Act, required EPA to look at science. And if air quality was not protecting public health with an adequate margin of safety, they're obligated to reduce the standard until it does. And that Congress also said that you can't look at whether it's attainable or the implementation cost in setting the standard. It's only based on this detectable health impact. And so the result is the standard is now below where we can achieve the standard, it looks like. And I say that kind of boldly. We've made great progress, but we have put monitors in very rural parts of the state, and even some of the rural monitors in the state are at or above the level of the current standard. And so that's that red dashed line in the middle, and I did put the statewide monitors in there as well to just kind of look at the headroom issues and what we have the ability to impact locally. Yeah, go ahead.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
Ask a question. When you made this presentation to the board here a couple weeks ago, something's been nagging on me pretty good. And that is with China. You know, so we know, and Andrew so eloquently put it, and I heard this from Senator Jenkins time and time again, as we have measured pollutants and things in Utah, air quality in Utah, it's never been cleaner than it is today. We've done a better job in Utah making sure we're continuing, as you mentioned, to progress. But as this standard continues to squeeze us, how do we get that that's coming in from outside, from China and the other? How do we, I have no way to even comprehend how we could do that with California. And I've got some strong opinions about that. But in China, how do we do that? I mean, we work on the 84 or 86% and we're still working on our little sliver here. I mean, I'm all for good air quality, and I like that, but hopefully maybe I should just rest and let you explain. But if we're all working here on the inside, we're working on the little sliver instead of working on the rest of the pie, and I don't understand that.
I will not have a satisfying answer to you, and that is that there are some provisions in the Clean Air Act that we can avail ourselves of, and I've got a future slide that talks about that just a little bit. But that is the squeeze that has resulted in this nationwide one-size-fits-all program that doesn't really work well in all areas. And in particular, the Intermountain West is particularly challenged on the ozone formation side. So ozone is formed from precursor gases in the atmosphere, mostly oxides of nitrogen that come from combustion. So whenever you burn a flame in ambient air, some of that process creates oxides of nitrogen from the nitrogen in the air. And the other one is volatile organic compounds, and those are paints, solvents, gasoline vapors. So any petroleum product that starts out wet, ends up dry, what happened is it went into the atmosphere. And as Andrew mentioned, here in the West, particularly also sagebrush, pine trees are natural sources of these VOCs as well.
Well, our friends down south will say you've got to graze it, you've got to burn it, or excuse me, you graze it or you log it, or the good Lord will burn it. And there's that, then you burn in the pine trees, that can't help.
Correct, because that creates more ozone, more NOx precursors as well as VOCs.
Well,
So
I hope those folks, I hope this message gets to those folks in Northern California really quick. But yeah,
Commissioner, and Bryce will in a little bit talk more specifically about the international emissions and how we're trying to address that. So we will come back a little more to your point as well.
So this is highlighting that once the standard goes into place, again, the Federal Clean Air Act puts deadlines in place for the area to craft a plan to meet the standards. And the other nuance here is also that's a little bit difficult to explain, and so I'll just take a minute. And that is, with each standard, a new baseline is set. And so all the plans that we did for past efforts for our winter particulate pollution, we were able to identify reductions of over 30% for VOCs, 35% for NOx emissions, because those are also precursors to the formation of our winter particulate matter. With the new standard, there's a new baseline that's set. And so the new baseline is 2017. So we can't take credit for any regulation strategies that were in place before that on the regulatory side, but we certainly still get the benefits from the actual air quality side from those early reductions. But all the new planning we have to do is based on that new baseline.
Got a quick question online from Commissioner Van Tassel.
Yes, thank you. Bryce, what is the current standard, the new standard that we're working towards?
Yes, so for summertime, it's the fourth highest value measured each year, averaged over 3 years of 70 parts per million, sorry, 70 parts per billion, 0.7 parts per million, 70 parts per billion of ozone in the ambient air on an 8-hour average on a daily basis. So 70 is the number.
Okay, thank you.
So the clock is moving forward, and the highlights here is we crafted a plan that the Air Quality Board approved back in September that has been submitted to EPA, but we weren't able to identify enough of the required reductions for that plan to meet the standard. And we also, there's something called a reasonable further progress requirement, and we weren't able to demonstrate compliance with that either. So EPA now has the plan in their hands, and should they decide to reject the plan, which again, we think they'll be obligated to do because it doesn't meet all the requirements, the first thing that happens is a freeze on transportation planning. And so the memo that came out with this meeting highlights that issue. Is the first thing that happens is projects that weren't in the first 4 years, and Andrew can give me the details on this, of the currently approved transportation plan. There's not the ability to modify that plan once that freeze starts. And we don't know what that date is going to be. It could be as early as October. It could be months or years later as well. And then the other thing is, once the freeze goes into effect, that starts a 2-year clock for, again, the state to address it, or that's when the sanctions start that were mentioned earlier as well, that these regionally significant projects would not be able to use federal funds or state funds to proceed. So what are you gonna do about it? That's the next focus here is, just an idea of some of those current planned projects that would be impacted by such a freeze, and then sanctions that could come into play are ones that you're familiar with.
Commissioner Van Tassel, did you have another question? You're muted.
No, I was just making sure my hand was lowered. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, next slide.
Then just, you get this? So the idea, remember Ben earlier in the meeting was doing amendments. As projects modify and they come on and we do our planning work, if the freeze is put in place, I'm overly simplifying, but if the freeze is put in place, we wouldn't be able to make any amendments anymore. So we've got the stuff in the plan now, but then we're frozen from bringing in new projects. And we're in a fast evolving dynamic environment, and that would be very problematic. And then 2 years up, around 2 years after that, we could have this lapse where there would actually be a prohibition on the use of funds for projects. And again, that list you just had up there, roadway projects and transit projects. Okay?
That's state funds as well, correct?
Yes. It's actually, interestingly, it's not just about the funding source. It's about the significance of the project, and these restrictions would apply more broadly to all regionally significant projects.
Then an earlier comment was previewing this slide, and that is what can we control locally? The vast majority of the emissions that are responsible for the local ozone formation on our hot summer days in the summertime comes from these natural and background sources, as well as the international transported emissions. And then there's also some prohibitions in the Clean Air Act about what we can control locally as well. So for instance, we can't set vehicle standards for either on-road vehicles, non-road vehicles, trains, things like that. Only the federal government can do that. And so we don't have the ability to further control those. And so even though we have 14% that we may have some responsibility for, as you look at the big picture, we don't have authority to regulate about half of those as well. And then of course, because we've been doing this so long, we've already put restrictive controls on all those that we have the ability to control. And so we've already put, major reductions on industries. Of course, even past transportation plans have had to meet transportation conformity, and that is we established budgets for the transportation sector that have to be met over time and followed. And so all those have already been put into place. And so again, with this new baseline, it's all new efforts and more costly efforts because all of the easy ones have been done. Oh. Next slide. So bringing this to your attention as elected officials and certainly impacted by the current situation, what are we doing to address it? So first, the Air Quality Board is still working very actively to identify additional strategies that can be put into place to meet the standard. Of course, there's the health benefit that comes from that, and that is the mission that we have. But we're also trying to navigate this regulatory process we have. The next one is particular to the international emissions component. Under the Clean Air Act, it's a very simple sentence that says if air quality in an area is impacted or is unable to attain the standard because of the impacts of international emissions, you can make a demonstration and then you wouldn't have to meet the standard. You could excuse those international emissions and it would set the baseline. That's the short Clean Air Act version. EPA has put guidelines in place that make that demonstration very difficult. We have submitted one in the past that they rejected. We are going to update that past 179B demonstration. And so the legislature, at least at the executive appropriations level so far, it hasn't finalized yet, has approved some funding for modeling to do this analysis to quantify that impact of international emissions on our high ozone days. We will be submitting that later this year. And then the next one is a litigation strategy. We know that EPA has already rejected that demonstration once. We think that they're not perhaps interpreting the Clean Air Act the way that Congress intended, and the mechanism to address that is after they disapprove it, then we have the ability to litigate that decision and have a court look at the entire picture and see what they decide. And the last one is we are not in this alone. Just with the current standard, there are 18 non-attainment areas around the country. So other states are also in the same boat where they can't craft a plan to attain the standard. Since we did submit a plan, we're not on the same clock. So 18 areas have already got the SIP freeze in place, the transportation freeze in place, and the sanction clock has started. And again, we expect to be in that same boat here in a few months. So we're working with those other states, other MPOs that have similar issues, to work with Congress and EPA to find some relief from this burdensome regulatory situation that we find ourselves in. So again, my purpose today was to provide some information, some highlights. And then last slide is some particular things that we're looking at, especially this legislative session that is still in play right now. The first one is the Air Quality Board adopted a rule to address one of the components of the inventory that actually is a very high amount that maybe you wouldn't expect, and that is two-stroke lawn and garden equipment. So I will also take a minute if I could just to explain this one as well, because it's hard to understand in that when you think about using the small two-stroke, typically a weed eater or a leaf blower, The emissions from that engine, of course, it's mixed with gas and oil. It's a less efficient combustion process than a four-stroke engine that has a combustion stroke and an exhaust stroke. Because of that, it's very high in VOC emissions. That doesn't have a catalytic converter like your car has to control those. It doesn't have electronic timing and ignition that controls that. It doesn't have the design of the cylinders to make combustion efficient. And so even though it's burning less gasoline over 1 hour, using a leaf blower for an hour is about the same as driving a modern car with your whole family from here to Disneyland. Has the same VOC emissions and NOx emissions that come from that, just because it's such an inefficient process. And so that is the target, that on high ozone days, it would be very beneficial if we get that component of the inventory out of the inventory. So what we had proposed to the Air Quality Board would be to restrict the use of that equipment on high ozone days, starting with institutional and government lawn care people the first year, going to the public the next year, and then small businesses that do lawn and garden care in the third year. Again, it wasn't a final rule, it was a proposal. As the session went underway, and that's why I was here, still appreciate your support on this issue. The legislature didn't have a level of comfort, and they worked with the governor's office and asked the Air Quality Board to withdraw that rule for consideration right now. And when I say worked with, there were actually two bills that were drafted legislature. One would have required all the rules that the Air Quality Board makes to go through and have a bill published in the legislature before they go into effect that approves those rules. And the other one would have required a committee of 13 legislators to review all the activities that the division does. And so the negotiations were not fruitful, other than we did make the request of the Air Quality Board to pause that rulemaking while we had more discussions with the legislature on that issue. The other ones are things that are moving forward, additional funding for incentive programs and the modeling that I mentioned, and then some more SIP planning, full-time staff that's there as well. And then the last one is the one that we mentioned also, that with this deadline approaching, UDOT is committed to working with transportation planners. And I would also say that Federal Highways is as well. We've coordinated with them on this issue. Unfortunately, under the Clean Air Act, they are the hammer, I guess. They're the ones that have to impose the sanctions that EPA directs. And so coordination there as well, and working with the region. So with that introduction, sorry, it's all bad news. We're working through these issues as best we can. And just wanted to let you know that, again, it's a challenge for us that is particularly challenging because of the situation we're in, because we've made such progress in the past.
And Mayor Silvestrini, do you want to add anything?
So first of all, I want to thank Bryce for that. And I think because I'm not a state employee, I have some latitude to say some additional things that Bryce may not want to say. So the only hope that we have with respect to this is an act of Congress to change how the Clean Air Act is implemented, or to relax standards, or to recognize states like Utah and the other western states where ozone is just a geographic problem, sunlight, altitude, and pine trees or whatever, but that to put hope in Congress doing that is a long shot. Okay. I mean, it would be nice, but our Congress doesn't seem to be able to do anything. So the other strategy that is at play here is to, I think, be able to show to the EPA to rely upon their discretion for somebody to be able to conclude that we've done everything we possibly can do, and get some leniency with respect to that. And that therein lies the idea of trying to limit two-stroke motors because they are bad for the environment. Okay. And what we got, I think, from the legislature is, and obviously we have to balance things, right? And we have to consider the economic impact of eliminating two-stroke leaf blowers on landscaping companies across our state and things like that. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting that's not a real concern, but if you weigh the actual costs of continuing to do that, let me say, the cost of continuing to not take action that we could take to show that we're a good actor and actually trying to clean our air, we jeopardize all this transportation funding. So there's a real education issue here, I think, with our legislature. And I will say, you know, I've been involved in leadership in WFRC. We've gone to the congressional delegation with a letter from WFRC and from the Arizona MPOs and coordinating with other states to ask Congress for these things. We've also talked, you know, to the governor's office and legislative leadership in the House and the Senate. What we have not done is talk to individual rank and file members in the House and the Senate to the extent that maybe we need to do, because from what I understand, a lot of the pushback comes from folks who may not understand the problem. And we have to educate them about the problem so that we can make progress on it. And, you know, it doesn't please me that we pull back a regulation that would implement a gradual solution to try to solve a problem that needs to be solved. And it's a box we could check to the EPA and say, hey, look what we've done. Here's this and this and this. I don't want them coming back and saying, well, you were considering that, but you pull it off the table. That looks terrible, you know? So we just have to work to do a little more education so that, and we also have to be willing to make sacrifices, okay? I mean, I have a 2-cycle leaf blower, you know, and I have to decide to not use it, right? I have to not do that. So anyway, that's the problem, Bryce, I guess, that we face. And a lot of it, I think, is education to the legislature and maybe even the public about the magnitude of this problem, especially for a fast-growing state.
I'd say part of that problem is policing it as well. And, you know, you throw that out there and say, hey, Jeff Silvestrini, you can't use your 2-stroke motor anymore, but how on earth do we?
Well, we have that on no burn days, and we have that on, you
Yeah.
know, to some extent, vehicle admissions. I mean, and that's why education needs to go beyond the legislature. The public needs to understand that too.
Yeah.
That, you know, that's an easy thing to do. When you put it into graphic terms, like using a leaf blower for, I don't know how long it is, 1 hour is like driving to California in your car. That's a pretty amazing comparison, where it's pretty easy to understand how much that is putting into the air that you breathe, that we're breathing, that you breathe. You know, when you're using that thing, you're breathing it.
Yeah.
My other favorite one, I didn't put in this graphic, but look at the refineries. Everyone's familiar with refineries, Kennecott, all the industrial sources. So all the industrial sources within the non-attainment area, lawn and garden equipment's emissions are about 50% higher than all those combined. So all industry is here, lawn and garden equipment is 50% higher than all of industry.
Yeah, that is really low-hanging fruit that, have we
And
considered in our presentation to the EPA, you know, tickets to the Olympics, or the threat of blackout of the Olympics and not, I mean, just saying, you know, any incentive we can give them would be.
Then one more data point, and for you with your cities, because
It was a joke.
it would
Just for the
impact,
record, that was a joke.
city lawn care fleets as well. And so we did a pilot. So we've got a couple of them going on with DFCM with the state. Got some feedback after, you know, that there are really good commercial products available that are battery powered for especially the leaf trimmers and leaf trimmers and leaf blowers and string trimmers. The feedback we got back is they loved it. They had enough batteries, they could switch them out, they could use them all day long. The vibrations were less. They didn't come home smelling like 2-stroke exhaust. And you know, the hearing was another one. They didn't need the hearing protection. So they've used it. Weber State has done a pilot, and Utah Valley University has done a pilot. And all the feedback that we've got back is the commercial products are working very well. And in fact, for comfort of employees is much preferred over the 2-stroke options. So it is a change. It's an education piece that we're continuing to doing even in the absence of a rule, but certainly something that we need to adopt cleaner technologies. And I think that's a great one once we get the word out.
Thank you. Well, that is our, the last official item on the agenda, unless there's other business that, from the committee that you'd like to bring forward. Okay, then, because we follow the Utah Public and Open Meetings Act, We have training each year. We just did training a couple of weeks ago at our council meeting. For those of you who have not had the Public and Open Meetings Training Act training, we'll have about an 8-minute video when we're finished here. But for those of you who obviously may not want to stick around or have had that training elsewhere, you're free to go. But we would need a motion to adjourn after the video. Oh, yes.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adjourn immediately following the video on the Open Meetings Act.
Second. We have a motion and a second that puts us at the end of our meeting. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
So what's the Open and Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government actions and deliberations are openly conducted. Before we continue, keep in mind that this video is an overview, and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a governing body majority meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget or imposes or increases taxes or fees. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing and governing electronic meetings. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, collective bargaining, litigation, purchase, sale, or lease of property if an open discussion would prevent the entity from completing the transaction on the best terms, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information per the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. 2/3 of the governing body need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members. If 3 out of the 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%, which is not equal to or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and instead need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can't interview someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, or approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made. Emergency meetings may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided of the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members. So what's the Open and Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Meeting minutes and an audio recording are required for all open meetings, with limited exceptions. When an open or closed meeting is required to be recorded, it must be unedited and contain all the portions of the meeting. Recordings of open meetings must be made available within 3 days. Every entity needs to establish procedures for the governing body's approval of minutes. Pending minutes are written minutes prepared in draft form and are subject to change before being approved by the governing body. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication, such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes and that they're subject to change. Pending minutes must be made available within 30 days. Approved minutes are written minutes of a meeting that have been approved by the governing body. Approved minutes are the official record of the meeting and must be made available within 3 business days. Whoever is responsible for taking the minutes during meetings, typically the records officer, recorder, or clerk, needs to be familiar with what OPMA requires be contained in the minutes. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body either for or against the motion to close the meeting. The recording and any minutes must include the date, time, and location of the meeting, the names of the governing body members present and absent, and the names of all others present except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. For more information, access our local government resource center at resources.auditor.utah.gov.